Gary, talk to us about what's happening as a result of tariffs in the shrimp market.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you everyone for joining us today. The global shrimp market is in a state of flux due to these significant trade policy Jason just referenced. So in the shrimp part of the presentation, I'm going to cover three critical areas that I think impact everyone the most: the recent shift in U.S. import volumes, the new reciprocal tariff landscape, and other trade policy impacts, and what changes have meant and what these changes have meant for costs and pricing. So a little bit of a U.S. import landscape, the overall picture. Imports saw a slight decline in volume and value in 2024 to about 1.68 billion pounds, coming down from the peak of 2021, where we hit nearly 2 billion pounds. We know that that 2021 import volume was coming out of the COVID-19 era, when the world was reopening, and there was outsized imports because retailers and restaurants continued to buy at the pace that we saw. The retailers during COVID-19 in 2020, when the world was shut down and everybody was buying shrimp to cook at home, and restaurants, as they were reopening, looked right prior to closing and what their sales number was. So everybody was competing, and we had a glut of shrimp in the market at that time. The market was oversupplied, and as a result, it took 2 years really for a drawdown in inventory as prices hit multi-year lows. But if you really look at it, the overall trend is pretty much intact. I mean, if we look at how imports really see the growth, it continued on a consistent path. So again, 2021 was an outsized gain, but I think the rate of growth has returned to normal. So despite the declines recently, I think we're on the continued path that we've seen over the last 10 years, right? So if we're looking at the top trade partners here, we can simply move our trade portal and intuitively change to where we are. We all know that India is the #1 trade partner in terms of volume and value, with 2024, 650 million pounds sent to the U.S., worth about $2.4 billion. Ecuador, second, at 413 million pounds at 1.3 billion, and Indonesia 297 million pounds at 1.1 billion. So these policies have started to shift things. I mean, COVID-19 really was the driver of some of the changes for Ecuador, right? So Ecuador was a distant third, prior to that, but they were forced, because of trade flows and shutdowns, to diversify their partners. And the U.S. made sense. They were willing to pay for shrimp. They had a consumer that was now demanding more and more, and they had a close proximity. So shipping was certainly nice and easy for them. And Ecuador has gone from a 17% of our import volume in 2020 to 27% in 2024. So that concentrated effort to diversify their customer base has certainly continued, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this webinar as well. Looking at some of the other trends over the last couple of years, India and Ecuador saw volume declines last year, but that was relative to some of the other countries thinking about tariffs coming into the U.S. prior, and Vietnam and Thailand saw increases because they wanted to get anything in here because there was anticipation of some sort of tariff environment into the United States. So that's kind of looking at imports, and you can see what's going on there. Now, what's going on here currently with, if we change this to a little bit looking at biannual, you can see that the first half of 2025 saw a significant surge in shrimp imports into the United States, and that's where every country rushed product in ahead of tariff implementation dates. And so certainly that was expected. What the implication of that was that most people would have thought that the prices would have moved higher and that the wholesale prices would have followed suit. But it provided an inventory cushion and buffered the wholesale market for a little bit. And we're going to get into that later in the third part when we talk about costs and pricing. Right. But let's not just remember that it's not only the tariffs that we're talking about here. It's in the backdrop of anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties. So let's just, define them a little bit so that, we kind of understand that. But anti-dumping duties are tariffs placed on imported shrimp or other goods where the U.S. Government has felt there was unfair competition because of the product was sold at a lower price. Countervailing duties were placed on shrimp. As we saw, there was some subsidies or foreign government assistance to help them, sell at a lower price. And now we add into that our reciprocal tariffs, right? So they're placed in response to what the administration felt were imbalances in trade or some unfair practices. So the shrimp industry has been dealing with not only tariffs, but anti-dumping and countervailing duties over the last 12 to 18 months. And you put them all together, and there are some numbers that are clearly, outsized, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So the shock was that the reciprocal tariffs were imposed by the current administration on our major partners, and this is what's creating the trade balance, just as the industry was balancing AD and CVDs, right? So if we go into the specific countries' impact analysis of what's going on, Asia, this is where the major pain point is, right? India, they're facing the highest effective combined duty up to nearly 60%. This is effectively priced the largest supplier out of the U.S. market overnight. Their anti-dumping duty was 2.49%, their countervailing duty 5.77%, and now reciprocal tariffs of not only the initial 25%, but the additional 25% make it almost impossible to compete. But as we'll hear later, there's still going to be a major source of imports just because of product forms and some of their competitive advantages they have over some of the other countries. Vietnam and Indonesia, they were also hit with significant combined duties, 23% approximately for Indonesia, 49% for Vietnam. So this is also drastically reducing their price competitiveness. And if this wasn't enough, Indonesia also had some other headwinds in the form of the FDA Import Alert 9951 that blocked all shrimp imported into the U.S. Because of the radioactive cesium-137 that was detected. If you look at it from a import perspective, Indonesia accounts for approximately 17 to 20% of all imports. And really the majority of easy peel shrimp, something that's very common in the retail sector, comes from Indonesia. So a little bit of timeline on this. August 14th is when the notice of elevated amounts of cesium-137 were detected. So import restrictions were imposed. Luckily, late in the year, October, the Indonesian government and the U.S. government came to some agreement where new mandatory import certification requirements were implemented so that anything that was on the water by October 13th can get here by the October 31st date that's coming up tomorrow. So as of tomorrow, all shipments from the island of Java and the Lampung province must be accompanied by an official radioactive credential certification, right? So
Hey,
what's
Terry,
that? Yeah.
Can I stop you for a second?
Mhm.
A lot of folks in the chat room are saying that the charts are, you're not seeing the bottom of the charts. I don't know if there's a way you can amend how you're showing them.
Yeah, I'm scrolling down, scrolling through them now.
Okay. And the other thing I'm thinking is if you could put your cursor over one of those bars when you do that kind of thing, because then it'll show like the numbers that are visible, and they only need to see the most recent probably, but like they'll get the gist of like what it's measuring.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, can you see that one now? So we're talking about Indonesian shrimp, and the majority easy peel shrimp into the United States come through it. So you can see a pretty stagnant price structure in the U.S. wholesale market throughout the beginning of 2025, and then a little surge up, and then a significant surge once we add tariffs and the blockage of imports into the United States. So certainly, what it's doing to the price there. Now, if you look at Latin America, that's where you would see the tariff advantage, right? And you would think that, some things would certainly be more beneficial for Ecuador, especially. So, let's see what's happening with some of the Ecuador shrimp and how that's impacting the market. So right now, Ecuador enjoys the lowest rate of around 19%, right? CVD of 3.78 and reciprocal tariffs of 15%. So we talked about, what was happening after COVID, where Ecuador was really focusing on the U.S. By necessity, but now they're doing it because they want to. They are ramping up output and shifting focus to the highly wanted by the U.S. consumer value-added, categories like peeled and deveined. But while they had a tariff advantage, if you look at this chart of 1620 P&D tail on in the U.S. wholesale market from Latin American producers as well as Asian, they're pretty much on parity here in the U.S., right? So, what's causing that? The Latin producers, while they're trying to shift their supply chain here to the U.S., the problem is capacity, right? So they just can't produce enough for that excess demand that the U.S. consumer wants. And when I was at the Global Shrimp Forum, one of the major Latin producers used this example, and I think it's really good. If you were getting 100 containers a month, or from an Indian producer, or even a Latin producer, and now you need to add 20 more containers, Ecuador can only maybe give you that one additional or two additional because of capacity issues. So they brought prices straight up to the tariff ceiling that the Asian competitors had. So prices are on parity right now. And again, you can see that prices rallied from the initial April 2nd date to July about 15%, 24%, and then another 15%, till now. So, prices continue to rise, and I think that's, what we're seeing. So we've talked a little bit about what's happening in trade flows, some of the reasons behind it in tariffs. Now let's talk about some of the wholesale pricing dynamics and the current price reaction and cost structures. The wholesale pricing has been complex. All shrimp prices moved higher initially when reciprocal tariffs were announced, but they had a second leg up midsummer. And, this was pretty broad-based. And what that's telling the market and what's that signaling to the market is that cheap inventory of that preloaded imports into the United States is now gone. So all shrimp being sold now has those higher costs associated with it. And I know that we've talked about India, and the U.S. government has certainly discussed lowering that tariff rate to 15, 18% is what's reported in the news. And, that could be a good thing because if not for that, any Indian shrimp here that comes will have that significant higher cost associated with it. And importers will have to, make a decision of passing all of that, some of it, or absorb, that. And the margins aren't really there to have the ability to absorb all of it. So there's going to be some costs that are passed along. And when we talked about what happened in, these prices and what the impact was and where everyone would have thought that Ecuador had the advantage. But you got to remember, it's having the right shrimp in the U.S. So there are product forms such as, cooked and breaded and species black tiger that we simply cannot source anywhere else. So if you look at it, we talked about, P&D yes, you can origin shop a little bit, but Latin America has a capacity issue. But it's really, some of those other forms, easy peel, cooked. And if we looked at a cooked 16 to 20, the chart will pop up, and it's similar to, what happened in the rest of the industry, like a single leg up, and then the second one up here, and then certainly 40% rise in prices. And we have to remember, we are coming off the backdrop of multi-year lows into a more 10-year average, so that's something that must be remembered as well. But it's not only some of these other cooked. If we go to black tiger shrimp, similar response there as well. Again, this is why we're talking about India and other Asian countries are gonna be important partners. They have product forms, they have types that the U.S. consumer wants, and that people can't origin shop, and they have capabilities and long-term relationships with U.S. importers that aren't going to be broken overnight, right? So a little bit on the U.S. wholesale, we've seen prices move up into this time period, and that's also impacted at the retail level. So according to Anne-Marie Rohrink at 210 Analytics, shrimp prices rose 8.6% from September 2024 to 2025, and that reduced volume sales by nearly 13%. So it's starting to have an impact to the U.S. consumer. So what are some of the factors that we're looking at? They're going to influence price. With the lower priced inventory gone that we talked about, the higher cost inventory is here. So those costs are going to have to be passed along either in partial or in full. We expect the second half imports to slow, but they could surprise to the upside as we need shrimp forms and types that haven't been imported and having a tough time replaced in the current trading environment. And we're going to look at demand at these higher prices. So September gave us a 1 month glimpse of what happened at the retail level. We're going to look for a longer term trend to see if that influences any demand destruction. Some of the key market risks that we are looking at are supply chain bottlenecks. Can Latin America scale fast enough to meet U.S. demand without driving prices significantly higher or come out of their comfort zone? We're already seeing slower shipping times from Ecuador to the U.S., so that's something that we're going to keep a watch on. And then we're going to certainly watch quickly shifting trade policies, right? We've already talked that India and the U.S. are discussing a framework for a deal to reduce those tariffs from 50% to some other number that's been talked about, 15 to 18%, which is long-term bullish for the industry because that will certainly help future imports. But there will also be some short-term kinks with that as the higher priced inventory that is here needs to be sold. So will importers' dollar cost average on the way down or at current prices is similar the way they did on the way up? And then we'll be looking for retail acceptance and consumer acceptance. So will the end consumer continue to accept higher prices after hitting multi-year lows recently? And really, the key takeaways from this and being in the shrimp market this year is the market is rebalancing away from Asia towards Latin America where it can, but Asia still will be an important partner given their expertise in certain areas and certain product forms. And I think tariffs are here to stay in some form or another. And it's not just supply and demand that are going to be the dominant price and cost driver. So I appreciate the time today talking about the shrimp market, and we'll certainly get to any questions after we hear from some of the other presenters.
Gary, we don't have any indication so far how much shrimp India has sent to the U.S. since those new tariffs, do we?
No, the government shutdown, gives statistics a break. So no, we haven't got any of that data yet. Again, I know we talked about it, Jason, in length in a conversation about a week ago, but we do expect that India and those other Asian countries will be shipping in probably similar market share here to the U.S. Because of those product forms that people can't find anywhere else, and those species that people can't find anywhere else. The overall pie might shrink a little bit in August, September, October, but we suspect that they're still going to be an important partner.
There was a sense at one point that restaurants were burning through the cheap shrimp, as you discussed. However, leading up to those new tariff rates, there was a flood or an accelerated pace of imports. Do you think that folks have burned through that inventory already?
Yeah, for the most part, I think most of the cheap inventory is gone.
So there's a need, there's a desire still to import more shrimp. It's not like they filled the bank and they don't need to go out and get any more. They still need to get more shrimp.
They do. I mean, again, it's about having the right type and the right size shrimp as well. So typically, headless shell on and head on shell on are held a little bit longer. And then, your cooked, your P&D, your easy peel, you continue to import, those, throughout, longer periods. So, I think as people shift, especially in the US, people are shifting towards convenience. They're shifting towards ease. And now importers are starting to do the same. And I think they have to go out and find some of that. And again, these forms and these types, we didn't have much, except for peeled. You started seeing peeled increase in the first half of 2025 pretty significantly.
Okay.